But we begin this hour with Jeb Bush getting out his passport this week for a big trip abroad, a trip overseas ahead of his expected announcement of his candidacy for president a week from tomorrow. The trip is to begin this Tuesday with a speech in Berlin to German Chancellor Angela Merkel's party, the Christian Democratic Union. After that, Jeb Bush will travel to Estonia and then on to Poland. Foreign policy promising to be one of the central tenets of the 2016 campaign, not only pitting the Republican field against former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, but there are also deep shades of contrast within the Republican Party itself. So what is Jeb hoping to accomplish in his travels abroad this week? What does he need to say to do it? Joining me now to discuss, to preview this trip, is Mark Murray, senior political editor at NBC News. He joins us from Washington now. So, Mark, it's sort of a rite of passage, I guess it seems, the trip abroad for presidential candidates. We've seen these things in a couple cases go pretty poorly. Infamously, Mitt Romney in 2012 did not necessarily have a successful trip overseas. Chris Christie got in some trouble a few months ago. What are some of the landmines that Jeb Bush has to worry about as he sets out for Europe?
The biggest landmine is dealing with the press, Steve. And, you know, that was what ended up tripping up Mitt Romney in 2012. It's what tripped up Chris Christie when he went abroad earlier this year. And then, of course, you know, Scott Walker got a little bit of hot water, too, when he went on one of his trips. But what is fascinating about these overseas trips is they're coming when these people aren't even yet announced presidential candidates. You know, Chris Christie, he went abroad. He's not even a presidential candidate. Jeb Bush doesn't announce until June 15th. He's going overseas. The Mitt Romney example, and one that Barack Obama ended up undertaking in 2008, was one where when you become your party's general election nominee, then you go overseas to burnish your foreign policy credentials, to be able to look tough, to look strong, to look like you could have the part of being president of the United States. But this whole cycle is happening so quickly now where people are doing it before they even become a presidential candidate officially.
And, you know, Mark, when you say the name Jeb Bush and in the term foreign policy, you put those together. Obviously, that is a particular challenge for Jeb Bush to deal with this topic because of the legacy of his brother on foreign policy, the legacy of his brother on Iraq. We already saw a little while back just dealing with the sort of relitigating the Iraq war, how much difficulty Jeb Bush had approaching that. As he now sets out to sort of articulate a world view, is he feeling some pressure here, some extra pressure to find ways to distinguish himself from his brother? Is there a way for him to do that?
Well, you know, we really haven't seen on foreign policy him being able to distinguish himself between him and his brother. In fact, when he released to the people who are his foreign policy advisors, many of them are folks who ended up advising either his brother or his father on when they were in the Oval Office. But when it comes to Jeb Bush, he's doing this a little bit on safe ground, going to places like Poland, to Estonia, Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe's often been a pretty safe haven for Republicans, including George W. Bush, who was very popular in Eastern Europe. It's usually when people go to Republicans in Western Europe, it's a little bit more difficult. Democrats seem to have a bigger constituency in Western Europe, Republicans in Eastern Europe, and I'm not surprised that we're seeing Jeb Bush go to a place like Poland. In fact, that's where Mitt Romney also went in 2012.
Interesting. So there's red state Europe and there's blue state Europe, too,
Exactly.
I guess. Let's bring the panel in for this discussion, too, right now. Joining us again, they were with us last hour. Again, for this hour, Bill Scher with the Campaign for America's Future, Jessica Taylor, a reporter at NPR, Robert George, editorial writer at the New York Post. So let's talk about this question of Jeb Bush and the distance he does or doesn't need to put in there with his brother on foreign policy, because on the one hand, it's the obvious liability. On the other hand, though, the Republican Party, especially in the wake of all the ISIS beheadings of the last year, has become a lot more hawkish and in a lot of ways has gone back to that interventionism that George W. Bush has identified with.
It's becoming a foreign policy election. That's why you see so many candidates that, as Mark said, are trying to go abroad to try to burnish their foreign policy credentials, why you are seeing those with military experience like Lindsey Graham, like Rick Perry, really sort of talk up those credentials and stuff, too. But, you know, there is still that hesitancy that you don't want to get stuck in another quagmire or a way to sort of do this and how to approach ISIS and how to deal with that and stuff too. And so someone like Jeb Bush, I mean, you think Bush, you think foreign policy in a bad way, but I mean, he has been governor, and that's one of the hits on governors is that they don't have as much foreign policy experience. That you hear senators talk up a lot, like Marco Rubio has as well and stuff too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for him. He needs this in order to sort of burnish those foreign policy credentials, but it also does sort of bring up those bad memories about his brother.
And he's getting pressure too. I mean, Marco Rubio, who's really kind of surged on the Republican side, has done that in part by really taking a hawkish posture on foreign policy, on national security.
Well, in one way, this is an homage to his brother, the I Did Not Forget Poland tour.
Don't forget Poland.
But if he is meeting with foreign leaders and not embarrassing himself. George W. Bush had a problem in 2000 because he forgot foreign leaders' names. He never, and even as president, never developed a rapport as a comfortable figure on the world stage. He was a lone ranger. So if Jeb, in his body language, is showing I'm a different kind of Bush. I mean, he obviously can't handle the Iraq question very well, but in the images, as he come across as more diplomatic, that is a subtle way he could create some distance.
And Mark, we just one more to you, Mark. We're going to shift gears here in a second, but I want to look ahead to that announcement by Jeb Bush when he comes back. We're about a week out from Jeb Bush getting into this race. Think back 6 months ago to the promise of this sort of shock and awe that we heard from the Bush campaign. They're going to raise a ton of money. They were going to make this big emphatic statement. And 6 months later, now he's getting ready to get into the race. Where is he now versus where did he want to be right now?
He's in a place where it's not as good of a position as he was 6 months ago. And of course, when he went in with that shock and awe, trying to grab every Republican fundraiser, a lot of influential folks, he was able to kind of almost bully Mitt Romney from thinking about getting back into the race again. Remember, Mitt Romney ended up thinking, well, maybe I might try to give this another run. Then Jeb Bush ends up sealing his former Iowa top political strategist to make him his campaign manager. Then after that, Mitt Romney decided not to run. But what was so striking was that Marco Rubio decided not to get chased out of that contest at all. And you're now even seeing someone like Ohio Governor John Kasich saying, you know what, I thought Jeb was going to be able to suck all the oxygen out of the room. I'm now going to get in. And one of the reasons why the Republican field is so big is because Jeb hasn't been able to convince enough Republicans that he's going to be the dominant person in this race. I think in one way to kind of almost look at it, back 6 months ago, it looked like Jeb was your front runner, or at the very least a co-front runner. Right now, he's on the verge of just even trying to hold on to any kind of front runner status.
Well, that is amazing when you think back to the expectations from 6 months ago. NBC's Mark Murray, thanks for taking a few minutes this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks.